Are the early Gibson Custom Shops still viable today? This is IkeGuitar. Let's do it. Now, if you haven't seen my general overview of the Gibson Custom Shop, I've got a video on it in the description below. But in it, I detail generally what the Custom Shop is all about and what that means for you as a consumer buying guitars from this division of Gibson guitars. But buying a Gibson Custom Shop can be quite an ordeal, especially if you might be one of the more diehard Gibson fans that love the early 2000s, early 90s custom shops, as opposed to the more modern era of custom shops where things have been more refined but are just a little bit different. So here I'm going to give you a very surface level primer on what it means when you go and buy a Gibson Custom Shop, maybe not from an era that you're used to. I'm talking early 2000s, late 90s, things of that nature, because they're going to be around in the ether, and having more knowledge on your Gibson Custom Shops are going to help you as a seller and a buyer and a consumer of Gibson guitars as a whole. So let's dive in. I actually have a Gibson Custom Shop from the early 2000s. This is a 2004 Gibson Les Paul Custom 1968 in a really interesting finish. It's actually more of a cherry burst. And you might be thinking, wow, that 1968 reissue, not really 1968. It should have been an ebony guitar. And you're correct. But it's important to understand that because of my knowledge on the Gibson Custom Shop, I effectively got this guitar for $2,200. I'll have a video explaining my trading process down the road here, but effectively having the knowledge you need to buy and sell guitars is going to help you find great little gems like this guitar and get them on the cheap. Now, I think we've heard a lot about the Gibson Historic Collection. That actually began in 1993. So if you're looking for a guitar that was made to spec of a certain year or era in Gibson's history, like an R9, an R8, an R7, an R0, whatever, the Historic Collection is where you go for that umbrella of guitars. Now, the Historic Collection at Gibson always had an ebb and flow of quality control. Most people would agree that the 2000 to 2002s were when Gibson really made some of their best Historic Collection guitars. Now, you can go as deep in the weeds as you want, like when did Tom Murphy start signing his guitars, or when did they release certain models. I'll link a really cool Les Paul forum discussion below from way long ago, kind of detailing some of those changes. And although I can't tell you exactly, these are all things that are true, the people in the forum seem way more knowledgeable than me on how year to years changed in the Gibson Custom Shop, specifically the Historic Collections. But getting back to the guitar that I got, this Les Paul Custom 1968 is not considered a reissue. One, because reissues were ebony back in the day, so you can't call that a reissue. But it is part of the Historic Collection, because I got the Historic Collection case with it, and it has a lot of really neat features from the 1968 Customs that you're not going to see anywhere else. For example, it's going to have that long neck tenon, it's going to have split diamonds, it's going to have the block inlays, it's going to have these 57 classic humbuckers installed. These guitars were great, and the reason why they came in these bursts was because they were a special run for Guitar Centers back in the day. So this is actually called a 68 Custom F. The F stands for figured. And so back in the early 2000s, Guitar Center would effectively partner with Gibson and bring guitars into their stores that were effectively based on the models that they were supposing to be, but little tiny changes to make up for market interest. So you'll see things like a lot of tri-burst 68 Custom Fs out in the world. They're really cool guitars, and they're all great. And I've got a really special one, which is more of a clown burst, which is effectively a cherry sunburst without the orange in it. So for me, having an understanding of these guitars helped me find a really good deal for it. But I want to talk more about specific tips and tricks that I go through when trying to buy a Gibson Custom Shop from those early 2000s, late 90s eras. There's a lot of things to think about. One, pricing is not always consistent. Because the guitars were made so long ago, sometimes pricing gets a little weird. You know, I would say that generally, unless the guitar is an R9 or an R8, most guitars are going to be around that $3,500 to $4,500 range. And you'll be surprised at how much markup there is, because people who are selling these guitars either have a flawless example or they're just trying to effectively push value into the guitars because they're so much older. Really, generally, I would stay within that $3,500 to $4,000 range when thinking about buying a Gibson Les Paul Custom Shop or a Gibson Custom Shop generally from these early days. The Gibson Custom Shops have a very wide variance in quality control, and so every guitar is going to be a little bit different. So it's important when you're going shopping for one, if you have the chance to try one out, try it. And if you don't, you're kind of running blind, just be knowledgeable that sometimes pricing is just a little amorphous. And you'll find that if you go on Reverb and look at the price ranges and look up sold listings on eBay, the pricings can vary wildly. Second tip is, make sure your guitar has some kind of COA or warranty card in it. Gibson started issuing COAs and warranty cards very early on in the custom shop iterations, and it's important that you guys have some kind of warranty card determining, hey, this is a legitimate Gibson, because you'll find that value does tend to go down when you don't have a COA or a warranty card, and preferably both. I think as far as back as like 95, 96, we were seeing COAs for Gibson Custom Shops during that era, so make sure you have them. And if you are buying a guitar without a COA, make sure that you're getting a deal on it, because honestly, the COA is going to increase price. It came with a guitar originally. Yes, you can go to Gibson, run the serial, and they'll tell you whether the guitar is original or not, but it's part of the whole experience, and it's part of how that guitar looks to collectors and other people who are buying Gibson Custom Shops at the time. Third tip for buying Gibson Custom Shops from the early days, you really want to look at the finishes. A lot of the finishes were not great, okay? And if you don't have an eye for a finish, that's fine. If you like the finish of the guitar, that's cool. But just know that guitar finishes, especially bursts, are going to vary wildly throughout the years of the early custom shop days. And you want to find a good one, right? Now, I got kind of lucky. I won't consider it really lucky. I have a really good top on my Gibson Les Paul Custom, but it is going to be a clown burst. And the clown bursts, like I said, are kind of that cherry sunburst without the orange gradient in the finish. And for a lot of people, that did not look great, right? That happened in the 70s or so when they changed up some procedures and amount of aniline dye, and there's all kinds of science in regards to how we got clown bursts on Gibson Les Pauls. But for the sake of me, I actually don't mind it. I actually like a good clown burst if I can find a good one. But a lot of people may not see that as something to be desired. And so be aware of what finish your guitar is in. And if it is going to be an iced tea or a tri-burst or a lemon burst, or an unburst or whatever, make sure that those guitars look good. Make sure they look like guitars that have what would appear to be the most consistent finish for their age. And that will vary wildly, so be aware of that when you buy one. Alright, my fourth and final tip for buying early Gibson Custom Shops is you got to try them and see. You got to try them and find out. You're not going to understand Gibson Custom Shops from the early days until you actually get your hands on them and try a few and understand where you're coming from. Once again, look up my little link down below with that Gibson Les Paul forum where one of the users describes in quite a lot of detail what years changes were made in the custom shop line, specifically the historic collections. But typically, the closer you're going to get to an actual historic guitar, for example, it's going to be your safer bet as far as value. So if I'm going to buy an R9, make sure it has the burst that I want. If I'm going to buy an R8, make sure it has the neck. If I'm going to buy a Les Paul Custom 68 reissue, it better be an ebony, unless you feel like you can get a good value on a guitar like mine that maybe has some small changes, can't be considered an actual reissue, but has everything else that you could want in a guitar like that. And so understanding those things as a consumer, as a buyer, as a seller, it's only going to help you when you're going through early guitars from the Gibson Custom Shop, and will make you more informed and get you better deals on the back end. Guys, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing. I make videos all the time. I'm going to do a formal video on my Les Paul Custom 68F very, very soon. You're not going to want to miss that. But until then, go out there and look for some really cool early Gibson Custom Shops. There are a lot of really cool guitars that kind of fly underneath the radar as far as playability and value. And if you need a quality guitar that's made extremely well, and maybe not at the price point of a modern Gibson Custom Shop, it might be the ticket for you. You'd be surprised. This guitar plays like a dream. I should definitely keep this one. and sometimes you find magic gems wherever you go. So keep a lookout and have a great day.